to save mankind, he has entered into profound doctrine. Because even the assertion that Jesus Christ had a pre-incarnate existence, well, I use the word pre-incarnate, even that assumes a lot. Because was he really incarnate? Was he just a good man who, as a result of his goodness, was adopted as the Son of God? Indeed, there were early believers who were called adoptionists, who did not accept what is now the standard Christian view, that Jesus was God and that he was both God and man. They felt that Jesus was adopted by the Father and that he was not really God in the flesh in the way that was understood by the early church fathers. So I want to assert the primacy of doctrine, primacy of what you believe. Today, when you talk to people about Christianity, what they see as Christianity is really a person living a moral life. You talk to the average person. The average person will emphasize morality. In fact, many Christians will say in their testimony that it is because of this transformed life. How they know that Christianity is true? Jesus is real inside. Is real because of the transformation that has been offered as evidence for Christianity. And yet, the facts are clear, the empirical facts are clear, that people in a variety of religions manifest transformation. Not only have the stories been documented, but people know people who are Buddhists and Baha'is and Hindus of various sorts who have been profoundly transformed, who are different, who are morally transformed. I don't believe that one needs to be a Christian to be a moral person. And so if you talk to the average Christian, and you, in fact, many people will say, boy, you look like a Christian, you behave like a Christian. That's an expression of ignorance, because if you drill down to what the person means, the person probably means that you are kind, that you are patient, that you are not belligerent, that you are probably not looking lustfully at the sexy sisters the way others are. And that is what would identify you as a Christian. That's exactly how a Baha'i would live. That is exactly how a Muslim would live. That is exactly how a Hindu would live. In fact, the Hindu would go further in terms of his asceticism. So the ignorance among Christians is palpable, and certainly in Jamaica. Because if you ask the average person, what is identified as Christianity? Some will go into dress. A woman who, dresses piously is regarded as a Christian. Well, the Muslim women dress even more piously. They cover up even more than Pentecostal women. And depending on the strand of Islam, only the eyes are exposed. So, the average Christian in Jamaica, were he living in Britain or in Los Angeles, would be immediately confused, because he would see all kinds of religious people, Hare Krishnas, Munis, and all kinds of people, whose moral lives, whose examples are equally compelling. So therefore, what is Christianity? Can't be morality. Christianity, therefore, has to put a primacy on doctrine. Now, I brought an interesting book for this study tonight, Lost Christianities, The Battles for Scripture and the Faiths We Never Knew by Bart Ehrman. Now, Bart Ehrman is the leading liberal scholar. He was an evangelical conservative Christian who later went on to renounce his faith. And he's the star in the Western world now, certainly a star in the Western media. He has written voluminously about Christianity and about the early history of Christianity and the development of Christianity. It's a very interesting, one of his interesting books called Lost Christianities, which tells an interesting story about the early varieties of Christianity. In the early centuries of Christianity, you had the Ebionites, you had the Marcionites, you had the Gnostics as major schools of Christianity doing battle for primacy. In fact, in a number of the Pauline texts, what you see are disputes among these various sects. Paul doing battle with Gnostic ideas, doing battle with the Jewish legalists who had come into Christianity with a form of Ebionism. But Ebionism was more radical. The Ebionites rejected the writings of Paul, rejected much of the New Testament, did not accept all the Gospels, accepted Matthew, the Aramaic version of Matthew, because Matthew is said to be the most pro-Jewish of the Gospels. But the Ebionites rejected the virgin birth, rejected the idea of a pre-incarnate Jesus, and really taught a Jewish Christianity. Believed in circumcision, believed in Sabbath, believed in feast days, but rejecting Paul. Paul seen as the corrupter of Christianity, a view shared by the Muslims. Now, had the Ebionites won, because what you had in the early centuries, first, second, up to the third, was a fierce battle for the definition of Christianity. We know in the 21st century, we are doing battle, the denominations of Christianity, within a certain paradigm. So when we had battling between Catholicism or Protestantism or Armstrongism, Adventism, and so on. Yeah, but the field was much wider than that. We are battling in a contested area that has been marked out with a lot of other areas bypassed. We are contested in a very narrow field. Because Ebionism lost out, Gnosticism lost out, and Marcionism lost out. The Marcionites were the exact opposite of the Ebionites. Marcion rejected the Old Testament. Marcion said that the Old Testament God was not the true God, that he was a cruel God, that God did not really reveal himself to the Jews. The Marcions were strongly anti-Jewish. They rejected everything Jewish. So they rejected the Old Testament. Remember now that before Christianity was cemented and the Roman Church prevailed, you using political power also. Before that, there were various schools competing for the definition of Christianity. Had history been different, what we now know as Christianity would not be. You could have had a Marcionite Christianity, in which case the canon would not include the Old Testament. It would not include the Old Testament. The gospel would have nothing to do with Israelite history or Jewish history. It would be totally purged of all of those elements. Just as if you had Ebionite Christianity, the richness of Pauline theology would be lost. You would have Sabbath and feast days and circumcision, Jewish, kosher laws and all these things, but the richness and the beauty and the texture of Pauline theology would be lost. So when I hear Christians don't play doctrine, I am saddened by their historical ignorance. And it is a great pity that most Christians do not study Christian history. Because a study of Christian history would give them a greater appreciation for the importance and the centrality of doctrine in Christianity. When Paul was doing battle with Jewish legalists, there was no hint on his part that those people were more immoral than those who had the true doctrine. That they were not good fathers, good mothers and brothers and good community members. Today we have reduced Christianity to matters of love and matters of living. We have reduced Christianity to levity. We have reduced Christianity to experience. A man talk about the transformation in his life. That's a bastardization of Christianity. Christianity is not just about transformation. Christianity is not just about moral reformation. One could have moral reformation without Christ. No, you might argue that the really genuine and the deeper transformation come through Jesus. Yes, and I will concede that. But I'm talking about the outward manifestations of this transformation. What people recognize as transformation? A man not beating his wife, a man who is very generous, a man who would open old people's homes, a man who would open homes for the orphans and so on. A person who is patient in adversity, a person who doesn't gossip. Those kinds of outward manifestations of transformation. I say you can have that without being a Christian. In fact, you can even have that without being religious. Many social activists rejecting the corporate world, rejecting fame, spend their lives, expend all their energies in trying to make this world a better world. Don't believe in God, communists. In fact, the reason why they work so hard is because they believe this is the only life. And these Christians are thinking about heaven and kingdom, and therefore them praying and in monasteries and so on. These people say, listen to me, that's a delusion. We know this is the only life. Let us work to make things better for people. So when I have to endure the ignorance of Christians who don't play doctrine, so I say, do not, with a misguided view about tolerance, and say, boy, let us stop. What my friend Richard Aiken would talk about, these debatable areas of doctrine and disputes and all these things. What he would dismiss contemptuously like that, and so flippantly, without understanding that is these debatable issues, that those are the issues that have to do with the heart of Christianity. I want to quote something from Professor Bart Ehrman's book, Lost Christianities. And you see, understanding of the history of Christianity as well as the history of religions is very important. In the Roman world, the emphasis was never on what you believed. The Roman authorities did not care what you believe. People belonged to various and competing religious cults. It didn't matter. There were people who swore allegiance to different gods, to different deities. In fact, the Roman emperors themselves were deified. In the Roman cosmology, it's not a big way. Epistemology was not the most important thing. What we believe and how we know what we know. That wasn't important. What was important was lived experience. When Christianity came on the scene, it made a radical break with Roman worldview. Christianity was the religion that asserted in the Roman Empire that it mattered what you believe to such an extent that people were willing to give their lives for the doctrinal belief that the man who was crucified on the cross was very God and that he had come to set up a kingdom. They would not recant. They would not be a part of the trade guilds. To be a part of the trade guilds, you had to pay homage to various Roman deities. They refused. They didn't have any job, and eventually they lost their lives. There were many who said to them, but you can easily, it's no big thing. You be a part of the trade guild. If you go and you offer sacrifices to the gods, and you pay homage to the god, and you do obeisance to the gods, you can still be Christians. Christians say no, because our God demands exclusive worship. Today, you know that is called cultism. If you can't tell people you have to believe this or why you're not a Christian, let's say it's cultism. We're not in cultism here, man. We're talking about Jesus. Forget about all these things. Christianity was profoundly different. Christianity was asserting that there was a right way. I'm going to quote you from Barter Erdman. Erdman said, in some ways, this matter of being right was a concern unique to Christianity. The Roman Empire was populated with religions of all kinds, family religions, local religions, city religions, state religions. Virtually everyone in this mind-boggling complexity, except the Jews, worshiped numerous gods in numerous ways. The Jews had maintained this exclusivism. Christianity began as a sect of Judaism, carrying over this exclusive worship. No one thought it contradictory or even problematic to worship Jupiter and Venus and Mars and others of the great gods, along with the local gods of your city and the lesser divine beings who looked over your crops, your daily affairs, your wife in childbirth. But then came Christianity. As soon as Jesus' followers pronounced their belief that he had been raised from the dead, Christians began to understand that Jesus was in some way the only means of a right standing before God. But once this happened, a new factor entered the religion of antiquity. Christians, by their very nature, became exclusivists, claiming to be right in such a way that everyone else was necessarily wrong. This is historic Christianity. The people who I'm watching on my TV and who, under the cloak of tolerance and they are cosmopolitan and saying all of us are Christians once we believe in Jesus, they do not represent the heritage and the legacy of the early Christians. The early Christians were dogmatists. They were dogmatists. They taught certain creeds, and they say if you did not believe those creeds, you were not a Christian. Today, if you teach like we do, that unless you do something, you're another Christian. Even though you go to church and believe that Jesus was resurrected from the dead, we say another Christian, except you believe the gospel. That is outrageous. That is scandalous. That view now, it is so outlandish. But if you're living in the first century, where the Gnostic Gospels were saying one thing, the Gnostic Gospels were saying that people were not saved because of their belief that a man died on the cross and that his death was efficacious. No, that can't save you. The Gnostics say you have to come into a secret knowledge. You have to be the recipient of some mysteries, and it is through that knowledge. That's why they got the name Gnostics, from the Greek gnosis, which means knowledge. Unless you have that knowledge, you can't be saved. You are saved by knowledge. You see Paul battling these ideas in Corinth, in Colossae. In fact, you know, when you study, you read, you had the Da Vinci Code. The Da Vinci Code is a very interesting thing because that, on a popular level, kind of showed what were the struggles in the early centuries. So the Da Vinci Code popularized the struggles and the fact that the Roman Catholic Church won. You know, so Protestant custom and so on. Roman Catholic Church won. And Dan Brown's thing, well, you know, what if the Roman Catholic Church had not won? What would Christianity look like? It would not look like anything that it is today. And a lot of people who don't study Christian history don't realize how close the Gnostics and the others were to winning. They were very close to winning. In fact, if were it not for political power helped. The fact that Constantine became converted and became a Christian, and he was the emperor of the empire, and he legislated and fought against heretics. That had a lot, because the whole idea of the canon. What is the idea? What's the essential idea of the canon? You know how many gospels, in fact, Erdman here in this book, he lists a number of gospels that were circulated in the 2nd and 3rd century. You know how many gospels were circulated all over the place? You know, gospels of Acts, the word, you know, the Ebionites had their own gospels. There were all kinds of. How did you even know? How do we even come to this 66? And by the way, it's a long process. Over a long period of time. And the fathers accepted books, short books. Some books came very late. Took a long time for the book of Revelation to be accepted. Long time for Peter to be accepted. Martin Luther himself called James the book of straw. The man a problem with James because James talks so much about works. What it is doing in the New Testament. Martin Luther said James fundamentally misunderstands the essence of salvation. And him dealing with straw. Because the real essence of Christianity is not found in James, but is found in Romans. You know, the ignorance of Christians on these matters is astounding. And it leads them to de-emphasize. So I'm happy about all the people who were gangsters and become converted, and tomorrow I will interview some more of them. I'm happy for, you know, all the people who change, who were, you know, living worldly life like my friend I.T., my guest here, and, you know, become Christian. Nice. It's not enough to just change your life and become a good husband and, you know, stop fool around and stop drink and stop smoke. That's good, and that is a necessary part of Christianity, but that does not define Christianity. It's good that Lady Star is no longer Lady Star, but is Evangelist Marianne Hall. But she could be a good Baha'i and have the same transformation and stop dressing like a prostitute as she used to when she was doing the dancehall song. She didn't have to be a Christian to be changed and to walk away from profanity and vulgarity. She could have had some kind of moral transformation without professing Christianity. She could have been a part of Unification Church, and Unification Church would have taught her exactly the values that she holds, and the Christians and people in the world say, boy, ladies are changed, we're glad to change. She could be a good member of Unification Church with all of that. She does happen to be a Christian. I feel, well, that is Christianity. But that's not enough. So it's good that you start there. But having started there, you have to get your doctrine right. Paul wrote in the pastoral epistle, said, look to your teaching. Look to yourself, watch yourself, and what you're teaching. Because through that you'll be able to save yourself and to save your hearers. Importance of doctrine. Critical nature of doctrine. I quote again from Professor Bart Ehrman. Christians by their very nature became exclusivists, claiming to be right in such a way that everyone else was necessarily wrong. So I said that the idea of the canon. What is a canon? The canon is by nature a document of exclusion. There were many gospels circulating in the early Christian churches. How you think the canon got? How eventually books in the Bible? A lot of Christians them ask them, not say God inspired them. They don't even think. How we know say 66? Suppose it was 70. Suppose it was 50. The average Christian doesn't think about that. He's busy fasting and praying and speaking in tongues and experiencing the Lord. But these are crucial questions because we base our lives on these books and how they come about. Well, the books were originally circulated in the churches. So even though eventually the church fathers came to accept certain books and pronounce on them, they had criteria that they used, which determined whether they accepted the books or not. And a part of that of the criteria was the acceptance of these books in the churches. These books were first circulated among Christians. Some were accepted, popularly read among the churches, others were rejected. So what you had in the early centuries were, before the canonization, before that, what is famously now called the Easter letter, what you had were a number of gospels and a number of letters circulating over the place, being read in the churches. You could have continued with that. You didn't have to have a canon. You could just continue of all the different gospels circulating. The reason for the canon was to exclude. The idea of the canon is not to include. You had a wide variety. The canon was to say, outside of these books here, yes, sir, the others are not accepted. They are not authentic. They are not orthodox. We are defining the boundaries of orthodoxy. Christianity began as an exclusivist movement. Once you have the canon, and you stop it, because lots of gospel circulating, we say 66 we are accepting. And the fact that you even accept the Jewish, remember, the Christians now accepted the Jewish scriptures. That is radical in itself. If you left it to the Gnostics and the Marcionites, and Marcion was very powerful. If you left it to the Marcionites, you would not have a Bible with the Old Testament books. Therefore, ladies or others who come into Christianity, all the gospel DJs and so on, they have to be taught that, yes, you have to be taught the history of this thing. Brethren, this thing that you're a part of, you have to know something about